welcome you. If you've ever entertained the idea of living in Hong Kong, or maybe just wondered what makes it tick, you've probably heard the same thing. It's a pricey place, especially when it comes to finding somewhere to live.
That's definitely the reputation it has. And rent is, well, without a doubt, a major factor in that high cost of living. So for this deep dive, our aim is to kind of cut through some of that general knowledge and really unpack the specifics of monthly rent in Hong Kong, drawing on some detailed info we've looked at.
Right.
We want to give you a clearer picture, so those potential rent figures don't feel quite so overwhelming.
Exactly. We've sifted through quite a bit of data from typical prices in different neighborhoods to the actual ins and outs of the rental process itself. Consider this your direct route to understanding the real costs involved in renting a home in this really dynamic city.
Okay, let's get straight to the core of it then. Some key things to keep in mind right up front. For a basic one-bedroom apartment, you're probably looking at a starting point of around, say, 15,000 Hong Kong dollars for rent. However, and this is crucial, where that apartment is located will massively influence the final cost.
Makes total sense. Location is always a huge one, right? And it's not just the monthly rent we need to think about initially, is it? There are those upfront costs.
Absolutely. You need to be prepared for that initial financial hit, which typically involves a security deposit, usually 1 or maybe 2 months' rent plus the first month's rent paid in advance.
Okay.
Then you'll get the tenancy agreement. Now, this is a legally significant document, and really understanding its terms thoroughly is paramount.
Yeah.
You need to know what's expected of you and, well, what you can expect as a tenant.
Right.
Lastly, it's important to remember that the quoted rent often doesn't cover utilities, so that's another layer of expense to factor into your calculations.
Right. So let's get down to some actual numbers.
Mhm.
What kind of average rent figures are we seeing out there?
Well, we've looked at some user-provided data that gives us a pretty solid overview. For a one-bedroom apartment located right in the city center, the average rent seems to be around 17,589 Hong Kong dollars. If you look at similar places just outside the main central areas, that average comes down to approximately 12,103 HKD.
Wow. That's a pretty substantial difference, just based on whether you're right in the thick of it or, a little bit further out.
Yeah.
What if you need more space, say a 3-bedroom?
Yeah, for a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center, the average rent jumps up significantly to about 36,092 HKD.
Wow.
But moving to an area outside the city center for a similar sized place, the average drops to around 23,441 HKD. It really underscores the premium you pay for that central urban living.
Yeah, those city center prices certainly make you pause. It really seems to boil down to how much you're willing to prioritize location versus, well, your budget, doesn't it?
Precisely. And just to give a bit more detail, the average residential apartment rent varies across the main districts. Hong Kong Island tends to command the highest prices with an average around 17,360 HKD.
Right.
Kowloon offers a slightly more accessible average, maybe around 15,520 HKD. And then the new territories generally provide the most budget-friendly options, averaging about 12,680 HKD. Okay.
So, like we said, finding a balance that works with your finances will likely involve some kind of compromise on location.
Okay, so location is clearly a huge driver of price. But beyond just the general area, what other factors really influence how much rent you'll end up paying?
Well, even within the same district, things like how close you are to public transport, especially the MTR stations, can have a noticeable impact on rent.
Sure.
Then naturally the size and the actual layout of the apartment are significant. A bigger space will almost always cost more, obviously, but even how the space is used and whether the apartment's been recently renovated can affect the price.
Right, so like a newly done up one bedroom in a slightly less central spot might actually cost more than an older one in a more prime location. It's all about the specifics.
Exactly. And then you've got the building's amenities.
Yeah.
If a building offers features like a gym, maybe a swimming pool, or those really sought-after views like a harbor view, those extras will definitely be reflected in the rental price.
And finally, the age of the building itself can play a role. Newer developments often just come with a higher rental cost, even if they're in a comparable area to older buildings.
So as you start your apartment hunt, it really feels like you need to weigh all these different elements against what you can actually afford and what's most important to you personally.
Precisely. And to help with those location decisions, let's dive a bit deeper into comparing the main characteristics of those areas we mentioned. Hong Kong Island, as we noted, is generally the premium option.
Right, the priciest.
Yeah, you're paying for that central position, the ease of access to, well, pretty much everything, and often a certain level of prestige. It's a major hub for both nightlife and business.
This kind of place where everything feels very immediate and, right there.
Exactly. Kowloon, on the other hand, often provides a slightly more affordable way in while still being very centrally located. It presents a really interesting mix of residential and commercial activity. You can often find a good middle ground there in terms of cost and convenience.
So maybe a bit less of that intense 24/7 energy of Hong Kong Island, but still really well connected.
That's a good way to put it. And then you have the new territories. This area typically offers the most affordable rental options, but it does mean being located further from the core city areas.
Okay.
It tends to be a popular choice for families and maybe people looking for a quieter lifestyle, potentially with more access to nature. Interestingly, though, the new territories aren't just about lower cost. Some areas are becoming hubs for specific industries or offer unique lifestyle perks like easy access to hiking trails, which can be a big draw for some people, kind of shifting the value beyond just the price tag.
So it's a real trade-off then between potentially lower rent and maybe a longer commute or just a different kind of neighborhood vibe.
Exactly. Now, assuming you've got a clear idea of the costs in the different areas, what does the actual process of finding a property in Hong Kong look like?
Here's where it gets really practical.
Mm.
Do you try to navigate it all yourself or do you get some professional help?
You basically have two main paths. You can choose to use a real estate agent, which can be particularly helpful if you're totally new to the city and just don't know the local market dynamics.
Right.
Agents can give you valuable guidance through the whole process and help find properties that fit your needs. However, it's important to know they typically charge a commission, often around half a month's rent.
Yeah, I can imagine for someone who's just landed in Hong Kong, trying to figure out a whole new system, having a knowledgeable agent must be a huge relief.
Absolutely. So there's a financial cost, yeah, but potentially a big reduction in stress and time, especially if you're not familiar with the local property scene.
What's the other option then?
The alternative is to go it alone. This means doing more of the legwork yourself, searching through online property portals, checking local ads. You might save on the agent's commission, sure, but it will definitely require more of your time and effort.
Makes sense.
Regardless of which way you go, it's crucial to carefully consider factors like transport links, nearby amenities, and the general feel of the neighborhood when you're looking at potential properties.
Okay, so you found a place that looks promising. Time to talk money again, specifically negotiating the rent. Is that even really a thing in a market as competitive as Hong Kong?
Surprisingly, yes, it can be. Don't be afraid to try and negotiate, not just on the monthly rent itself, but also on things like the length of the lease.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and if you're in a position to maybe offer to pay several months' rent up front, that can sometimes give you a bit of leverage to negotiate a better deal. It's also worth asking about a potential rent-free period that's like a short period right at the start where you don't pay rent, giving you time to move in and get settled.
Ooh, that sounds like a really useful tip.
Yeah.
Are there any other terms that might be negotiable?
Well, it's important to clarify who's responsible for building management fees and government rates. While these costs often fall on the landlord, it's always smart to confirm. And remember, landlords might be more open to negotiation or offering perks if it makes them feel more secure about their tenants.
Right, so it's always worth asking. You never know what might be possible.
Yeah.
So you've reached an agreement on the terms. What's next? The inevitable paperwork, I assume.
Indeed. Signing the tenancy agreement. This is a legally binding document, and I really can't stress enough how critical it is to read it extremely carefully.
Okay.
Pay close attention to all the clauses, particularly those outlining your rights and responsibilities as a tenant, the details about your security deposit, and the agreed length of the lease. While we can't get into all the legal nitty-gritty, remember that the tenancy agreement outlines crucial protections for you too, like the landlord's duties regarding property upkeep and your rights if you need to end the lease early under specific circumstances. It's not just about cost and how long it lasts.
Are there any other vital things to look out for in that agreement?
Definitely. It's a very smart move to take both photos and maybe even videos of the property's condition before you move in.
Good idea.
This gives you a documented record and can be invaluable in preventing arguments later on when it's time to get your security deposit back. Also, double check that the agreement clearly states who is responsible for paying for utilities.
Good point. You definitely don't want any surprise bills later on.
And one final but very important step after you've signed the agreement is the stamping of the document. This needs to be done within 30 days, and there's a stamp duty fee involved.
Ah, stamp duty.
Yeah, typically this fee is split between the landlord and the tenant. The exact rate depends on the length of the tenancy. For a lease not exceeding 1 year, the rate is 0.25% of the annual rent. For leases over 1 year but not more than 3 years, it's 0.5%, and for any lease exceeding 3 years, it's 1%.
Okay.
You can think of stamp duty as the official government's way of, like, validating your rental agreement, making it legally recognized.
Okay, so you've signed on the dotted line, the agreement's stamped. Now comes the actual payment for the place. What are the standard deposit requirements we talked about?
Right. When you've secured a property, be prepared for a pretty significant initial payment. The standard practice in Hong Kong is usually 2 months' rent as a security deposit, plus the first month's rent paid up front.
Okay.
So, using our earlier example of a 15,000 HKD monthly rent, you'd be looking at an initial outlay of 45,000 HKD just to get the keys.
Wow.
And don't forget to add in the estate agent fees if you used one that's often half a month's rent on top of that. So, like we mentioned right at the start, that initial hurdle can be pretty significant, really highlighting Hong Kong's reputation for high entry costs.
That's a considerable amount to have ready right at the beginning.
It really is. So make sure you have a crystal clear understanding of the total deposit amount needed and the process for getting it back at the end of your tenancy. Landlords generally prefer this initial payment via a cashier's order or a bank transfer.
And what about the regular rent payments once you're actually moved in?
The vast majority of landlords in Hong Kong prefer ongoing rent payments through bank transfer. Setting up a recurring payment, like a standing instruction, can make the process smoother for everyone.
Right.
While some landlords might still accept checks, it's becoming less and less common. It's absolutely vital to keep a record of every single rent payment you make, just in case any questions pop up later. And of course, pay attention to the agreed due date to avoid any potential late fees.
Are there any ways to maybe save a little bit on those regular rent payments?
Well, occasionally, if you're in a position to pay your rent for several months in advance, some landlords might be willing to offer a small discount. It's definitely something worth negotiating if that's financially feasible for you.
Now, what if someone is moving to Hong Kong from overseas or needs to pay rent using an international bank account? Are there specific things they should be aware of?
Yes, definitely. Using your regular bank for frequent international transfers can often mean high fees and not so great exchange rate markups.
Hmm.
Luckily, there are specialized services available now, like Wise International Payments, for instance, which often give you much better exchange rates and lower fees for sending money across borders.
Okay, good to know.
If you are using an international payment method, it's crucial to factor in potential transfer delays so your rent always arrives on time. And like with all the money stuff, it's essential to discuss your preferred payment methods with your landlord before you finalize the tenancy agreement and make sure all the agreed details, including any fees, are clearly written down in the contract.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about something that's maybe not always top of mind for renters, but is definitely important. The tax implications of renting in Hong Kong.
This is indeed a significant area to consider.
Hmm.
If you're employed in Hong Kong, it's possible your employer might provide a housing allowance or maybe even company-provided accommodation as part of your package.
Right.
This can have a noticeable impact on your tax situation.
Yeah.
How much tax you pay related to your housing can depend on various things, like the nature of the accommodation and whether your employer gives you a direct allowance or reimburses you for your rent.
So if you get a housing allowance and then pay the rent directly to the landlord, how does that affect your taxable income?
Well, in certain situations, if you get reimbursed by your employer and then you pay the rent yourself, it could potentially lower your taxable income. However, the specific rules around this can be pretty complex.
Okay.
So it is highly advisable to get professional tax advice to make sure you're setting up your rental arrangements in the most tax-efficient way. The Hong Kong government's Inland Revenue Department website also has helpful examples and outlines the rules for taxing rent in different scenarios, so that's definitely a valuable resource to check out.
Are there any tax deductions that individuals renting property in Hong Kong might be able to claim?
Yes, there is a maximum domestic rent basic deduction that eligible taxpayers can claim, currently capped at $100,000 per year of assessment. It's essential to keep all your rental documents, like the agreement and payment records, well organized, as you'll need them when you file your tax return. And as with anything tax-related, it's always wise to stay informed about the latest regulations, as these can change.
And we touched on stamp duty earlier, but are there any other local tax laws renters should know about?
Yes, besides stamp duty, it's important to note that the Hong Kong government levies rates on all properties, including rentals. These are basically property
Right,
taxes.
the rates.
Yeah. And while they're typically the landlord's responsibility, just knowing they exist adds another layer to understanding the overall cost of property ownership, which, indirectly affects rental prices. When you're looking at a place, make sure to clarify with the landlord or agent whether these government rates are already included in the quoted rent or if they might be an extra cost you'd have to cover.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about the costs and the various processes involved. Let's now focus on the practicalities of actually finding the right apartment. It can feel like a really big task.
It certainly can seem overwhelming at first, but like you said, with good planning and information, it's definitely doable.
Hmm.
Ultimately, it's about finding that sweet spot where your needs, your preferences, and your budget all line up. And a huge part of this is choosing the right location.
We talked about the different districts earlier, but what are some of the key things someone should really think about when deciding on a specific neighborhood?
Think about your daily life and priorities. How important is your commute, time, and ease? What kind of lifestyle are you after? Are good schools a major concern for your family? Or are you more interested in having vibrant nightlife and entertainment close by?
Hmm.
As we've discussed, Hong Kong offers a really diverse range of neighborhoods, each with its own vibe and price tag. So, knowing your priorities is absolutely key to narrowing down your search effectively.
What about the more practical things someone should look at when checking out a neighborhood?
Accessibility is huge. Check the public transport options. Are there MTR stations nearby? Good bus routes? Are taxis easy to grab? Then think about local amenities. Are there supermarkets, restaurants, parks, things that matter for your daily life within easy reach? And finally, just consider the overall environment. Does the area feel safe? Is it generally clean? What's the noise level like? Is it something you can live with? Living somewhere convenient and comfortable can really boost your quality of life.
It really does sound like there are always those trade-offs to weigh up between cost and convenience when it comes to location.
Absolutely. So once you have a clearer idea of the kind of location you're aiming for, the next critical step is setting a realistic budget. As we've stressed, rent is likely your single biggest monthly outgoing.
Yeah.
So it's essential to figure out what you can comfortably afford. Don't forget to factor in all those other costs we've discussed, utilities, internet management fees, if applicable. And remember, some service apartments might offer all-inclusive deals, which can make budgeting simpler.
So how does someone actually figure out that upper limit for their rent?
A generally sound guideline is to aim to spend no more than maybe 30 to 40% of your monthly income after tax on your rent.
Okay, 30–40% post-tax.
Yeah. Start by calculating your net monthly income, then list out all your other regular monthly expenses. And that should give you a clearer picture of how much you can realistically set aside for housing without, stretching yourself too thin.
We talked earlier about using real estate agents. What are the main pros and cons of going that route, especially for people new to Hong Kong?
Yeah, for newcomers or those just unfamiliar with the local rental market, using an agent can be a really smart move. They can save you a lot of time and hassle by finding properties that fit your needs. They can be invaluable in negotiating the lease terms, and they guide you through all the paperwork.
Which can be tricky.
Exactly, especially if you're not familiar with local procedures or maybe the language.
But as we mentioned, there is that commission fee to think about.
Yes, you will typically have to pay an agent's fee, which, as we said, is usually about 1 month's rent. So if you decide to use an agent, it's important to choose someone reputable. Ask for recommendations from friends or colleagues, or check online reviews.
Good idea.
Be really clear with the agent about what you need, location, size, budget, and don't be afraid to try and negotiate the commission fee if you feel it's appropriate.
What about really understanding the rental agreement itself?
Yeah.
Beyond just the rent amount and the lease length, what are the key things to pay super close attention to?
The lease duration is crucial. As we discussed, leases in Hong Kong are often for a fixed term, commonly 2 years. The first year is usually fixed, meaning it's hard to break early without penalties.
Right.
The second year often becomes periodic, offering more flexibility, but it's vital to understand the notice periods required if either you or the landlord wants to end the lease. Always read the clauses about renewal options carefully and check if there might be a rent increase if you renew. Shorter leases do exist, especially in service departments or sometimes during off-peak seasons, but they might mean paying a higher monthly rent. A periodic tenancy usually means the lease continues month to month after the fixed term, with agreed notice periods.
And what about that security deposit we talked about earlier? Any key points there?
Yeah, the security deposit, usually 2 months' rent, is the landlord's protection against damage beyond normal wear and tear or unpaid rent. It is absolutely essential to do a thorough inspection with the landlord or agent before you move in.
Document everything.
Exactly. Meticulously document any pre-existing damage with photos or videos. This is your best protection against disputes when you move out and want your deposit back. The agreement should clearly state the conditions under which the landlord can withhold part or all of your deposit.
Okay.
And assuming there are no valid claims, the full deposit should be returned to you after you leave, usually without any interest earned.
Finally, what about the basic rights and responsibilities of tenants in Hong Kong? Just the highlights.
Understanding these is key for a smooth tenancy and avoiding conflict. Your key responsibilities include paying rent on time, keeping the property reasonably clean and maintained, and following building rules.
Makes sense.
Generally, the landlord is responsible for structural repairs and major maintenance, but the specifics should be in your lease. If you're new to Hong Kong's laws, seriously consider getting legal advice before signing. A solicitor can review the contract and explain everything clearly.
Can you give us just a quick rundown of some key rights and responsibilities?
Sure. As a tenant, you generally have the right to quiet enjoyment, living without undue disturbance. You have the right to a safe and habitable home and proper notice before the landlord enters, except in emergencies.
Okay.
Your main responsibilities: pay rent on time, keep the property in good condition, fair wear and tear excluded, and don't cause problems for neighbors.
Okay, so we've covered rent, deposit, legal agreements. Now, what about those extra costs that often aren't in the main rent figure? Utilities, for instance.
Yes, this is super important for budgeting. In most Hong Kong rentals, utilities are not included in the monthly rent. Tenants usually have to set up their own accounts and pay separately.
So electricity, water, gas.
Exactly. Electricity, water, and gas. Service departments are often the exception, where utilities might be bundled into the package.
So the first step is always check the tenancy agreement carefully.
Absolutely. Read it thoroughly to see exactly what's included and what's not. If you're unsure about anything, just ask the landlord or agent for clarification before you sign.
Right.
And like we keep saying, make sure to factor these ongoing utility costs into your total monthly budget. It can be really helpful to ask for copies of previous utility bills for the property to get a realistic estimate of what you might be paying.
What's the general process for actually setting up these utility services once you move in? Is it complicated?
Setting up utility accounts in Hong Kong is usually pretty straightforward. You'll need to contact each provider individually. The main ones are CLP Power or HK Electric for electricity, depends where you live, the Water Supplies Department for water, and Taungus, HKCG, for gas.
Okay.
Typically, you'll need your Hong Kong ID card and a copy of your tenancy agreement. Some might ask for a security deposit, too.
Good to know.
It's a good idea to keep records of all your charges. And definitely take a meter reading on the day you move in to ensure accurate billing right from the start. And if you notice any problems with utilities when you first move in, tell your landlord straight away.
Are there any other fees renters might need to budget for besides rent and utilities?
Yes, a few other potential costs. Some buildings have monthly management fees for upkeep, security, communal areas. Often the landlord pays this, but always confirm.
Right.
Similarly, government rates, those property taxes, are typically the landlord's responsibility. But again, double check your lease. Don't forget internet and TV services. Those are usually separate costs.
And insurance?
Yes, it's highly recommended tenants get their own home contents insurance to protect personal belongings. The landlord's insurance usually only covers the building itself.
Okay.
And one last thing, it's sometimes possible to negotiate for a short rent-free period, maybe up to 2 weeks, right at the beginning. This gives you time to move in and get set up before you start paying rent. Worth asking.
Okay, wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground today, from average rents to legal stuff and all those extra costs. Do you have any final words of advice or key takeaways for listeners thinking about moving to Hong Kong?
Yeah, just to circle back to the core message, while renting in Hong Kong is definitely expensive and can feel really fast-paced, it is absolutely manageable if you do your research and plan carefully.
Right.
Take the time to explore different neighborhoods to find what fits your lifestyle and budget, and don't feel pressured into making quick decisions. By being informed and prepared, you can definitely find a great place to call home in this amazing city. And, it's worth noting that platforms like moveandstay.com have actually been helping business travelers and expats navigate Asian rental markets, including Hong Kong, for over 25 years. They can be a valuable resource, especially for finding flexible accommodation options.
That's some fantastic advice. And on that note, here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given the long experience and insights gained by platforms like moveandstay.com in serving business travelers and expats in Asia for so long, how might the changing needs and preferences of this group continue to shape the rental landscape in global hubs like Hong Kong in the future? It's certainly something interesting to think about as you navigate your own potential housing journey. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.